Hello, this is Damian Katz. I'm the Director of Library Technology at Villanova University's Falvey Library and the Community Manager for the VuFind project. I'm here to tell you about what's new and what's changed in VuFind 11. This is going to be quite a long presentation, but I've designed it in such a way that you can stop listening when you've had enough. So we'll start off with new features, move on to things that you'll need to know if you're upgrading from a previous version, and get deeper into the technical details of what you'll need to deal with if you've done a lot of customization at the very end. So feel free to stop listening when you've had enough. So first of all, it's important to talk about the fact that 11.0 is a very big release, probably the biggest in a long time, maybe the biggest ever. 600 pull requests went into making this release. It includes the completion of a multi-year project to upgrade our database support to use the Doctrine library. And the VuFind community has continued growing throughout all of this, leading to many more contributions than we've had in the past. There's also been a lot of change in our surrounding ecosystem with new releases of PHP and changes to Laminas libraries. And so we've had to make quite a few big changes that we might not otherwise have planned on, but that were necessary for forward compatibility. I should also note that while this is going to likely be our biggest release for a while, change continues, so there will be more releases and more changes, but I'm really encouraged by the fact that we have such a strong community and that many of these necessary changes are leading to improvements in the code. So I see the future as looking bright, but I do apologize for the amount of work that it's going to take to do some of these upgrades. It's not my choice, but it is a necessity to keep things modern and working. So let's get into the new features of VuFind 11. One big one is the support for online payment of fines by users. This currently has plugins built in for the PayTrail and Stripe services, plus a simulated demo payment system you can use to just try out the system. And it's all pluggable, so if you have a different payment provider, you can build a plugin. We have support for a new search backend, the ProQuest Federated Search Gateway, which allows direct searching of ProQuest databases for subscribers. So if you have some ProQuest databases and you want to directly search them, say as part of your combined search system, it's now easier to do that. We've added self-service review and removal of comments, ratings, and tags so that users can more easily manage the content that they create. We've added an optional audit event logging system so that you can log important events to your database if you're troubleshooting things like login behavior, or if you're using the online payment system, this makes sure that we track all of the transactional details in case something goes wrong and needs to be investigated. We've added new command line tools for upgrading the system and creating the underlying database, which makes it easier to set things up without having to go through web-based tools, though those tools still exist. We've added a new record tab plugin to make it possible to embed channels into record pages, which adds a bit more flexibility in the way things are displayed. We've added API keys to our public APIs, so you don't have to turn this on if you want to keep things fully open, but if you want to control access to the way people use VuFind's APIs, you now have a mechanism for that. In addition to totally new features, there are also a number of improvements. Let's start with some configuration improvements. We've added some optional caching functionality to improve the speed of configuration loading if you turn it on. We've made the record data formatter more configurable. So now, instead of having a global configuration, you can also configure it in connection with specific record drivers, so different types of records can display different sets of fields. We've added a setting to turn on facet counts for checkbox facets. We've added a setting to prevent the system from ever displaying a public contact email if you don't want it to do that when something goes wrong. We've changed the way password recovery works so that it is now no longer honest about whether accounts already exist. So if you put in a non-existent email or one that corresponds to a real account, you'll get the same message unless you turn on recover, be honest, in which case you'll get different messages. So this allows you to protect your system from people investigating what accounts might exist, but you can turn off that behavior if you really want it to be more informational. We've also added a setting to turn off the permanent link option on record pages if you don't want that. We've added a number of new settings to the rate limiter, including integration with Cloudflare Turnstile to help protect against unwanted bot behavior. The RSS feed can now be configured to get the links it links to from your record drivers in priority over linking to internal VuFind record pages if you want that behavior. And we have a new setting so that instead of showing the there is no cover image, you can completely hide images for records where covers are not available. We also have some improvements to integrations with integrated library systems. We now have the ability to turn off specific ILS functions on a timed basis. So, for example, if you know that there's going to be maintenance during a certain window and you don't want people to be able to try to place holds because it won't work, you can set up some dates in a configuration and the functionality will just be gone during that period. This, of course, requires the ILS driver to support the new functionality. We've added this to a few drivers to begin with. More can be expanded as needed. There's been work done to allow the EBSCO Discovery Service search backend to integrate directly with ILS drivers. So if you have your records loaded into EDS and you don't want to have to maintain a local Solr index, but you do want to offer patron empowerment features through VuFind, that's now technically possible and can be switched on. We've made it possible to reset an ILS password through the ILS driver when supported, of course, which makes it possible to have more functionality when using your ILS as your authentication method. We've also made some more general integration improvements. A big one is that what was previously called the DOI linker has been replaced with a new feature called the identifier linker, allowing you to augment your records with data retrieved on the basis of a number of different possible identifiers, not just DOIs. And this is useful for connecting with services like Browsine that provide access to content from articles and journals and so forth. Now those connections can be made not just at the article level, but also at the journal level. And we've enhanced a number of the connectors related to this. And one of those enhancements is in the Browsine identifier linker, which can now display expression of concern notices and has functionality for picking what it calls the best available link. So instead of showing a list of links to all different content, it can just show one that is most likely to get the user what they want. We've also added support for exporting to Zotero Web Library. On with the improvements, we've made a number of display improvements. In the alphabetic browse feature, subject headings now show separator indication between subfields, which improves readability where things were previously run together in unintuitive ways. We've improved the way the course reserve search displays empty values if a particular reserve is missing an instructor or a particular course title. It now shows a little no content message instead of just a dash. We've also made some improvements to search and indexing. Mark format determination has been improved to better reflect electronic serials. Solr similar record lookups, which power the related records functionality on record pages, now make better use of call numbers and can account for Dewey as well as Library of Congress call number headings. Additionally, some of the indexing rules have been adjusted to empower this functionality. And finally, we've added support to the Solr schema for date range fields. So you can now store in the index a value representing a larger unit of time than just a year. So, a full decade, etc. All right, that's all of the improvements. So now let's talk about changes to the upgrade process. This is very important before you upgrade to VuFind 11, you must upgrade to VuFind 10. This is because there are so many large changes in VuFind 11 that VuFind 10 includes tools to make it easier for you to get to 11. So you might as well upgrade to VuFind 10, make sure all of your code is forward compatible with 11, and then the 11 upgrade will be much easier. So now is the time, if you are behind, to get caught up. Um, the upgrade process itself has also been simplified and streamlined. One of the advantages to setting this requirement that you get to 10 before moving to 11 is that it has allowed us to drop a lot of complicated code related to very old versions of VuFind. So, for example, you can no longer upgrade from VuFind 1, which structured everything differently, directly to VuFind 11. And that's allowed us to drop all the logic related to those very old things. So again, please just get to 10, and then 11 will be an easy hop, and going forward, the upgrade process will be less complicated. Another major change is that we've made the database upgrade process considerably more consistent than it was before. Previously, there was very complicated logic that would try to automatically upgrade your MySQL database, and there was no equivalent to that for Postgres. So Postgres users had to do a lot of things by hand. MySQL users had it easier. Now, everything is based on migration scripts for both databases. There's a tool for tracking which migrations have been applied, which will help you keep track of ongoing changes to the database. And no matter what backend you're using, you'll have the same experience. One important note is that if you've been pulling code from the dev branch during the development of release 11 and you upgraded the database prior to the modernization of the database upgrade tool, you may need to do a little bit of manual work to make sure that your 11.0 upgrade goes smoothly. There are notes about this in the wiki, or you can ask me if you need more details. But if you are just using normal published releases, you should have a smooth transition from VuFind 10 to VuFind 11. I should also note, as I mentioned earlier, we now have command line tools for all of the upgrade steps. You can still use the old web-based tool if you want to, but you now don't need to expose potentially sensitive functionality to the public in order to make an upgrade. You can just do it all from the command line. All right, now we dive deeper into what has changed. So first of all, some important upgrades to dependencies. We have dropped support for MySQL 5. So if you're using MySQL, be sure to use a supported version, MySQL 8. MySQL 5 has not been supported by the MySQL community for quite some time. I don't think this is going to be a difficult change for anyone, but just wanted to mention it. If you use MariaDB instead of MySQL, note that in your configuration, in the database section where you specify which database you're using, you should now specify it as MariaDB and not as MySQL. Even though the two databases are largely compatible, they have grown apart to enough of an extent that it sometimes is important for VuFind to know the difference. At present, this mainly applies if you're using the Solr Mark tool to import Mark records into Solr, but it may impact other areas in the future. So I strongly recommend to just be as specific as possible in your configuration. Also important to note, support for PHP 8.1 has been dropped because that product is reaching end of life later this year. I'm talking to you in 2025. So everyone should be running supported versions of PHP. VuFind expects that. So the new release has raised the requirement to 8.2. While doing that, we have also ensured that compatibility with 8.4 has been improved. So if you're closer to the bleeding edge, things should still work. We've also modernized the Solr schema. We've raised the schema version to version 1.7, which is much more modern than the ancient version we've been using for a very long time. We've also made a few minor adjustments along the way. Because of this, you will need to make a full reindex of Solr when you upgrade, so prepare for that. And note that the new schema defaults turn on doc values for most fields. which changes the behavior of Solr in a way that will probably be helpful for most users, but it's important to be aware of this. Doc values reduce the amount of work that Solr needs to do in certain circumstances, but at the cost of making your index larger. So your index may get a little bit bigger on disk, and you may find that the Solr heap is being used less. So you may want to change your Solr memory allocations to leave more space for your operating system to cache things from disk, and you may need less space for Java to be throwing things onto its heap. So just keep an eye on performance after the upgrade and tweak as needed. Now let's talk about changes to the database schema. We've added quite a few new things in the database. So there are some new tables related to features I've mentioned earlier. There's the audit event table for audit logging, a couple of new tables for tracking payments, and we've also added the log table to the official default database schema. This was a configuration example in config.ini for a long time, in case you wanted to turn on logging to the database. We decided to just create it so that it's there. This allows us, for example, to assume it's present in our test environment and write tests related to logging. Apologies for the kind of silly name, but we decided to keep the name log table instead of calling it log messages or something else because that example has existed in the configuration file for a long time and people might already really be using it. We've also added some new fields to the resource table so that we can keep track of when resources tracked in the database were last updated, and so that we can include a display title in addition to the existing sort title, so that if resources are missing from their original search backends and we display them based on data cached in the database, the display looks better. This should improve users' favorite list experiences, among other things. We've added a new token field in the OAI resumption table so that it's now possible for the OAI PMH server to use resumption tokens that are different from the unique IDs of the rows there. We've added a type field to the user list table to support future development in which there may be different types of user lists. Right now, this just gets set to default and there are no other values used. This is a growth investment for the future. We've added a foreign key relationship from the search table to the user table to improve performance and data integrity. We've revised the Postgres database definitions to better align with the MySQL ones. We noticed some inconsistencies in the way things were named in some of the types. They're now a lot more equivalent to ensure that both things behave the same. And there's been a bit of tweaking to indexes in a few places to improve performance. Now we dive into changes to the code in various degrees. And the Laminas ecosystem has been changing rapidly over the past couple of years. They've been preparing new major versions of some components, and they've been abandoning other components where they feel that their community can't adequately maintain them and there are better alternatives available. So this has necessitated us to make a lot of changes to be compatible with new versions of components and to drop components that are no longer being managed. And I've talked about this before, and one of the biggest things we've been preparing for is the elimination of Laminas DB, the Laminas database abstraction library. And as I already mentioned, Laminas DB has been replaced with Doctrine, which is a much more widely used library and has a lot of powerful features. Indeed, some of the database improvements I've mentioned, like the improved consistency between the different database platforms, have been enabled by features of Doctrine. So, if you watched my 10.0 changelog video, you'll know that we made most of the major architectural changes needed to upgrade to Doctrine in that release. And so most of the work in 11 was just taking the internals of our database services and replacing the logic with Doctrine. So all of those database service internals were completely rewritten for release 11. All of the Laminas related code in the VuFind DB row and VuFind DB table namespaces has been completely removed. It's now replaced by equivalent entity and service code. So, again, this is one of the reasons why we strongly encourage you to upgrade to 10 before moving to 11. A lot of the database work you'll need to do will happen with that upgrade. At this point, the only code you'll need to change is if you have written low-level database access logic using Laminas DB. And if you do need help translating that, take a look at how our existing entities and services work, and you should be able to find some models you can imitate. Another Laminas library that has been completely removed is Laminas config. This library was designed to provide an object wrapper around configuration and to help with configuration loading. It was really useful when it came out, 10 or 15 years ago, but now native PHP functionality has made it largely unnecessary, and so the community has stopped supporting it. But we used it widely in the code base, so removing it required quite a bit of change. First of all, the Laminas config class, which wraps around configurations, has been replaced by a homegrown VuFind config class, which does the same thing, but is not part of the library. It's just local code. But we didn't build this because we plan to use it forever. We built this to soften the blow of removing the Laminas config library. We are working toward just using arrays to represent configurations instead of using this somewhat confusing object structure. So you'll see VuFind config used in various places, but expect that in future releases it will be completely gone. Now, regardless of whether we changed to arrays or used the new config class, we had to change every constructor and method signature that uses configuration because Laminas config was referenced in many places and it no longer exists. So if you have any custom code that extends a class or method that accepts a configuration, you will have to make some changes to it. It may be as simple as changing the namespace on the class, but if you're extending code that has switched from objects to arrays, you may also need to change a bit of the logic to read the configuration. Also, on a related note, there's a helper method in our base controller called getConfig that returns a configuration object. All code referencing that has been refactored to use a new getConfig array so that we've been able to deprecate getConfig. But again, if you're using getConfig in a local custom controller, be aware that it's going to return a slightly different object, and that we'd encourage you to switch to arrays instead. That's just going to make life in the future easier. We also removed a class called VuFind Config Reader Cache Decorator, which apparently was never used for anything, but has been sitting in the code base for a long time. So if you have some use for that, please let us know, and maybe we can replace it, but I suspect it was just an artifact of the past. And finally, there was a VuFind config feature ini reader trait, which used Laminas config to read ini files, but we don't need that anymore. Just use PHP's native parse ini file directly if you need to read an ini file. Next up, Laminas has removed their cryptography library, Laminas Crypt. So any custom code relying on classes from that library is going to need revision. For internal VuFind code, we were mostly able to replace Laminas Crypt with native PHP functionality. In a couple of places, we've built our own local classes that replace the missing functionality with much simpler, thinner code than the Crypt library offered. Once again, note that any classes in the code base that made reference to Laminas Crypt classes have had to have changes to use the new alternatives. This impacts the ILS authenticator, the secure delegator for the session, and the command line tool for switching database hashes. Note on the subject of switching database hashes, any stored encrypted passwords should be regenerated after this upgrade. The way Laminas Crypt stored encrypted data is different from the normal way PHP does it. We still support that old way for backward compatibility, so you don't need to worry about losing all of your encrypted passwords when you upgrade. But there's a setting in config.ini called legacy PBKDF2, which controls whether we store things in the old way or the new way. By default, that's going to be the old way for back compatibility. But what I encourage you to do is after you've upgraded, turn it off, use the new way, and then you just need to run the command line utility to regenerate the hashes, and you'll be all set to upgrade to future versions. We will drop support for legacy encrypted passwords in the next release, so it's important to do this before the next time you upgrade. Another Laminas library that we have removed from our dependencies is Laminas Loader, which was an auto-loading library to help Laminas retrieve class code from disk. That was important in the old days, but since Composer has become a widespread tool that handles auto-loading, Laminas recommends just using Composer auto-loading instead of their old library. So what we have done to comply with this recommendation, we have reconfigured the Laminas module manager to switch off Laminas Loader so that modules are no longer using it. In future versions of the module manager, there will be no support for Laminas Loader at all, so we are preparing for that to happen. If you have a local code module, you should no longer include a get autoloader config method in the module class and should instead use Composer autoload settings in your composer.json or composer.local.json. If you look at the existing Composer configuration in VuFind 11, you will see what changes you need to make if you want to switch this out. And if you create new code modules in the future, the installer tool will automatically make the necessary configuration changes for you. Note that when you do a Composer install, you will still see a warning about Laminas Loader being discontinued and that you shouldn't use it. The reason for this is other packages like the module manager still include Laminas Loader. So VuFind is no longer using it, but we are still installing it as an indirect dependency. And this will go away as soon as the Laminas community finishes eliminating it from all of their packages. So feel free to ignore that warning. It doesn't actually impact anything that we're currently using. Another deprecated Laminas library is Laminas Log, their logging library. They've recommended using Monolog, which is a more widely used logging library. So we've taken that recommendation and completely swapped out all of the Laminas log code with Monolog. Um, One of the reasons for this change is that Laminas Log was not compliant with the newer PSR PHP standards, whereas Monolog is. So making this switch allows us to use those standards more widely. So for example, Laminas Log Logger Aware interface is now replaced by the PSR equivalent. The logging level constants for, indicating things like debug versus warning versus error have been replaced with the PSR equivalents. The VuFind log logger class and its associated factory have, of course, been completely rewritten because Monolog works differently. In conformance with standards, we've deprecated the short versions of logging methods when you're logging things. So, for example, don't use err, use error. Um, And of course, if you have any custom log handlers, those will need to be revised because plugins for Monolog look totally different from plugins for Laminas Log. But all of the internal ones provided with VuFind have been completely rewritten for you. And again, you can look at those for examples of how the new system works. Another one that has not gone away yet and will take some time and effort to get rid of is Laminas HTTP. This is still being supported by the Laminas community. It's still very widely used in the VuFind codebase, but the writing is on the wall that it is not going to be around forever. Similar to Laminas Log, the issue here is that the PHP community has developed standards about how HTTP libraries should work, and Laminas HTTP is so old that it does not comply with those standards, and it would be difficult to make it do so in the future without a lot of work. So the Laminas community, I think, is leaning toward just getting rid of it and telling people to use other things. One of the most popular alternatives at the moment is Guzzle. And so what we have done is we have created a VuFind HTTP Guzzle service, which can be used to either obtain a Guzzle client to use directly or to make some HTTP requests through Guzzle with helpful convenience methods. Now, Guzzle service was already there because a few of the third-party libraries we use require Guzzle, and so we needed to create this service to create Guzzle clients where needed. So VuFind was already in a situation where we were using different HTTP clients in different situations out of necessity. So what we're working on doing now is starting to convert Laminas HTTP calls to Guzzle calls so that when the time comes that Laminas HTTP has to be completely removed, it's less work. We've started in a relatively small way in VuFind 11. The VuFind HTTP caching downloader has been changed to use Guzzle, and as a result of this, there's a callback mechanism where you can set a decoding function, and that callback function now expects Guzzle instead of Laminas HTTP. Similarly, the VuFind exception HTTP download exception class now uses an array to represent what headers are included in the error message rather than a Laminas headers object just for broader future forward compatibility. A lot more Guzzle migration is likely to take place in release 12, so be prepared for that. Additionally, this is a relatively small thing, but the Laminas community is rearranging some packages. Previously, translation was integrated into their internationalization module. They've split it out into a separate Laminas translator package, and we've introduced that into our codebase for forward compatibility. So, um, as I said, this new package separates some things just to make the Laminas ecosystem more granular. So all references to the Laminas I18N translator interface have been updated to the new, shorter Laminas translator interface, or the MVC specific version, the MVC specific implementation, I should say, as appropriate. So if you have custom code that references the translator interface, just be aware that minor adjustments may be needed. All right. Another major area of work, and this does tie in somewhat with the Laminas config replacement, we've done a lot of work to improve the internals of how configurations are handled in VuFind. A big thing is that we've created the VuFind config manager to replace the VuFind config plugin manager. So the plugin manager used the Laminas plugin manager infrastructure to load configurations. It had sort of a special factory. It was shoehorning config loading behavior into plugin loading behavior in a way that wasn't entirely intuitive or natural. It made more sense to build a class that's specifically about handling configurations. So we took the opportunity to do that. The old plugin manager is still there and still works. So you can use it. You don't have to worry about your code breaking if it depends on it. But again, before the next major upgrade, you're going to want to swap out the plugin manager for the config manager. We've introduced an interface called Config Manager Interface as an abstraction for loading configurations. Both the plugin manager and the config manager implement this interface. Again, this is designed to smooth the transition from one to the other and represent things in the most abstract way possible. So again, any classes that reference the plugin manager in their constructor or other method signatures have been revised to use the new config manager interface. This affects a lot of code. So again, if you've extended and customized things, look through your custom code for that old plugin manager. You may need to make adjustments related to it. Additionally, we had a couple of convenience traits that relied on the config plugin manager. And these traits assumed in the past that there was a property called this config loader. but we just standardized that to this config manager, so we use the same naming everywhere. So if you use either of those two traits, the bulk action controller trait or the bulk action trait, you may need to adjust some code. Probably this won't affect you though. More configuration related changes. The configuration upgrade class has been modernized and simplified. As I mentioned earlier, part of removing support for upgrading directly from VuFind 1 to VuFind 11 is that it allowed us to get rid of things like old configuration modernization logic that would upgrade ancient configurations. So the config upgrade class no longer supports all that old stuff because we assume you're already on VuFind 10, at least when you begin. And since we were drastically changing this class anyway, we also took the opportunity to add types to the method signatures to modernize the code. And the constructor signature was changed due to some internal logic changes. So in the unlikely event that you have a custom subclass of this, you'll need to make changes, but you probably haven't customized this class. Additionally, the VuFind Cache Manager class has had its constructor signature and factory changed to support some of the new configuration caching features I mentioned earlier. Moving on, there have been some changes impacting authentication. So the VuFind Authentication Manager class has had types added to its methods and properties and has dropped the deprecated isLoggedIn method from past releases. So again, if you have a custom subclass, minor changes may be needed. We've introduced the VuFind Auth interface as a generic interface for authentication plugins. Previously, all authentication handlers had to extend the abstract base class in VuFind Auth abstract base. They all still do, but introducing this interface makes it possible to build a completely different implementation of an authentication handler if for some reason you wanted to do that. The database authentication handler has had its constructor signature changed, which was needed for some of the new password hashing behavior related to removing Laminas crypt. Finally, the handler interface itself has been changed a bit to make things more clear. We had methods called reset state and logout, which have been changed to clear login state and get logout redirect URL for clarity. There used to just be a get session initiator method that would return either a URL or false. Now there's a has session initiator method that you can use to check whether a single sign-on type of login is being used, and get session initiator returns null if you call it when there's no supported functionality. Also important in authentication land, as I mentioned, there were changes to password recovery, some of which required lower level code modernization. So several authentication handler methods have had signature changes, specifically get password policy, supports password recovery, and validate password against policy. So again, if you've customized some of this functionality, just be aware of that. Additionally, the template used to build the email sent to the user to recover their password has been moved out of the email folder of the theme and into the auth database folder so that recovery emails can be made authentication handler specific if necessary. Finally, we've changed the default value of the recover hash lifetime setting in config.ini. This controls how long a recovery email will function. Previously, the default was 2 weeks, but in the interest of tightening up security, that default has been changed to 1 hour. So if you really want those to last a long time, just double check the setting. Or if you've customized it, maybe now's time to think again about whether it needs to be as long as you currently have it. On to user interface changes. Very important, and this was discussed at length in the VuFind 10 changelog video, but We've dropped support for Bootstrap 3. It's very old. We now support Bootstrap 5. So the three themes that were based on the Bootstrap 3 library, Bootstrap 3, Bootprint 3, and Sandal, have been completely removed. This is another reason why you should upgrade to VuFind 10 before moving to 11. VuFind 10 includes great tools for helping you make the migration from Bootstrap 3 to Bootstrap 5. So if you upgrade there, upgrade your theme, then moving to 11 will be painless. Additionally, there was a Bootstrap 3 compatibility layer, some JavaScript logic that was included in the Bootstrap 5 theme in VuFind 10. That has been removed, and the underlying code has just been made fully Bootstrap 5 compatible. So if you have old code that relies on Bootstrap 3 things, you should change it to match the changes in the Bootstrap 5 based themes in VuFind 11. There are notes in the wiki to help with these changes if you need them. And if you really want to keep the Bootstrap 3 compatibility layer, you can, of course, take that code out of VuFind 10 and just move it into your local theme until you've had time to make the necessary changes. Also important, in VuFind 10.2, we introduced a helper called Asset Manager, which is used for loading assets like JavaScript and CSS into the code. This fully replaces use of the Laminas helpers inline script, head link, head script, and foot script in VuFind 11. This is necessary due to changes in the Laminas view library, which made our customizations impossible to maintain. The asset manager helps make the asset pipeline work and also makes the code a little more readable. So if your code uses these old Laminas helpers, take a look at the VuFind 10.2 changelog. I talk there about how to move to the asset manager. You need to do that before you upgrade to VuFind 11. Finally, there's a new view helper for managing breadcrumb trails. This is used everywhere in VuFind 11. It makes the templates more consistent, easier to read. You don't have to use it if you don't want to. Old style code will still work, but I strongly encourage you to use it. It will make things more consistent and easier to manage in the future. Other user interface changes, the channels functionality has been significantly revised. This is the feature that VuFind uses for encouraging serendipitous discovery of related resources. The front-end user interface of this feature has been completely rewritten. We did this mainly because the old interface used the slick carousel library, which is not very accessible or well maintained. The new interface doesn't use carousels at all. It's a little bit more accessible, a little more friendly. Additionally, some of the back-end code has been changed to support improvements on the front end. So the channel loader constructor signature has changed, and the channel provider interface configure search params method has a new signature. Additionally, the configuration for channels is a little different. Previously, channels had a setting in channels.ini called channel size, which just controlled how many values were loaded into the channel. But now we work on a page model. So there's an items per row, which controls how many items are shown in each row of results in the channel. Rows per page, which controls how many rows are loaded each time the user says add more. And max batch size, which controls how much data is retrieved from the server. So by default, we show rows of 6, and we only show one row per page. So the user will see 6 items in every channel, and they can add 6 more items by clicking add more. The max batch size is set to 48, though. So we load 48 results from the server. The user can reveal them 6 at a time. And if they want more than 48, we go back to the server and load more. So you can tune that however you like for your users if those defaults are not to your liking. Additionally, along the same lines of improving accessibility by getting rid of carousels, we had a record tab called the Similar Items Carousel. We've gotten rid of that and replaced it with our new Channels tab. The channels can load similar items just the same way the similar items carousel did. And by default, the channels record tab is configured to just show similar items. So this means that we have all the same functionality we did before, but with less complicated code and less redundancy. And if you want to change the similar items tab to do something more than it used to, it's as simple as configuring channels.ini, and you can load all kinds of other information into your record page. We've also modernized date sliders in the search result controls for, filtering by date ranges. It's more accessible and forward compatible. We got rid of some old legacy JavaScript libraries. Similarly, the PubDate Viz Ajax recommendation module, which can display date graphs above your search results, has been rewritten to eliminate old jQuery dependencies, use more modern libraries for rendering graphs. And finally, small but significant, there was a template called helpers/star rating.phtml, which displayed the star control for rating records. And that template has been moved into the UI components folder to make it a standard VuFind user interface component for consistency with other things. You probably haven't overridden this, but if you did, be aware you need to move that file to a new place. Um, Also, a relatively small thing, extended HTML escaping of attributes is now configurable and turned off by default. See the extended HTML attribute escaping setting in config.ini. The reason for this, there's an escape HTML attribute view helper in Laminas View. By default, that applies very aggressive escaping to values, which can make your HTML quite large and hard to read. And it's only needed if you set HTML attributes without putting quotes around them. And we're very consistent about doing that. So we've turned off that heavy escaping to make the code more readable and more concise. But if you think that there's any risk that you have custom code where you're not properly quoting your attributes, you can turn that back on to, protect against potential injection vulnerabilities and so forth. Additionally, we have completely revised item status display code to use PHP templates in place of JavaScript logic. This just makes customization easier. The old code had a lot of heavy JavaScript code that was just assembling HTML. That's now all built by templates. And on a related note, there's a availability as string method in the availability status class that in the past would return the strings true or false, but now it returns available or unavailable to make those values more meaningful. So if you're working with availability statuses in custom code, be aware of that. On a similar note, there are alerts that can display in the user account area showing status information about various things like requests and checkouts and so forth. And that logic is now being rendered on the server side through the Ajax handlers instead of assembled in the JavaScript. Again, this just makes it easier to maintain and customize. We've also generally improved all of our pagination related templates. So if you have a custom paginator somewhere, you might need to adjust that. There's a CSS class that used to be called checkbox filter. It's been renamed to checkbox filters for clarity. If you rely on that, again, tweaks may be needed. And finally, constructor and method signatures in the Linkify view helper have changed to support the new feature of making it possible to stop linking email addresses if you don't want those to be automatically linked by Linkify. All right, moving on to ILS related changes. The ILS Authenticator class has had types and optional arguments added to the new catalog login and send email login link methods. This was part of the password recovery improvement work. Um, all of the ILS drivers have been refactored to use new helper methods called create patron array and create profile array to build the return values related to patrons and user profiles. This just ensures that they all return more consistent values. If you have a custom driver, you might want to consider using these. It's not required, but it's helpful and might make your code more readable. Uh, Also, a couple specific improvements to the Folio driver. Its get allowed service points method was accidentally public in past releases. It's been made protected, and its signature has been expanded a bit. You probably never called it directly. You shouldn't have. If you did, please stop. Additionally, the logic in the driver for retrieving item status and holdings has been significantly rewritten to improve performance, but if you have custom logic related to this, it may need adjusting. Also, a few miscellaneous changes that didn't fit in those other categories. We've upgraded the LMC RBAC MVC module, which is our role-based access control module that powers VuFind's permission system. There's a new major version of that. It thins down the code and changes some namespaces. So if you have custom code related to role-based access control, take a look at the changelog for LMC RBAC MVC version 4. You might need to make some small adjustments. We have considerably revised our SRU retrieval code. I mentioned earlier we added support for that ProQuest gateway. It's an SRU-based API. And in the past, VuFind only used SRU for talking to the old WorldCat version 1 API, support for which was removed in VuFind 10.2 because that API no longer exists. But we took away one SRU API, added a different one in its place, and so the base generic SRU code has been revised to be more compatible with ProQuest because there's really no reason to worry about the abandoned WorldCat API that's no longer even online. And finally, if you've used the relatively recently added account menu.yaml configuration to customize the user account menu, note that it has been restructured to support multiple sections of configuration. Existing configurations should still work, but you might want to take a look at this, and if you have customizations, just make sure that your configuration is up to date with all the latest features. All right. You may already think we've gotten technical enough, but we're now going to go even deeper into technical nitty-gritty. So if you haven't customized a lot of code, now might be a good time to hit the fast forward button. But I don't want to miss anything that might be important to somebody, so I'm going to continue going through all these remaining details, but I'll try to be as quick as I can. This is a fairly big thing. PHP 8.4 does not like it if you put a type on a nullable argument without indicating that the type itself is nullable. It will start showing deprecation warnings. This pattern was widely used in older PHP code. So in VuFind, we've modernized all of our implicitly nullable arguments to have nullable types, changes a bunch of signatures. So if you've customized any of that code, you'll need to update your signatures to match. You might want to consider using a tool like PHP Stand to analyze your code and find these kinds of inconsistencies. It's probably easier than reading it all manually. The search service interface get searches method has been changed to make the session ID value nullable. All setters on interfaces in the VuFind DB entity namespace have been changed to use a static return type. The VuFind export class has had types added to all of its methods and has a different constructor signature and different get bulk URL method. The Solar backend terms method has been updated with explicit types. We've added types to all of the methods in the VuFind record tab manager. We've changed the constructor signature of VuFind record resource populator. The VuFind OAuth 2 entity scope entity and the record data formatter spec builder have added types and introduced fluent interfaces for cleaner code. The related view helper has had types added to its public methods. The VuFind theme initializer has had signature changes to get theme options and send theme options to view as part of general improvements to the way themes are set up. The array format returned by the base search options classes get hidden sort options method has changed from an array of strings to an array of associative pattern and label arrays. To eliminate time zone inconsistencies in OAI PMH resumption token expiration dates, we've changed the signature of the OAI resumption service interfaces create and persist token method. An important side note about this, we noticed that OAI PMH tokens were not storing their expiration dates in the correct time zone. We've standardized that so that going forward, OAI PMH behavior will be more consistent. But note that after this upgrade, if you're not in the GMT time zone, your token expiration may shift by a few hours. But it shouldn't really matter much because rather than expiring in a day, it will expire in somewhere between 12 and 36 hours. Won't make difference to most real world situations, but you might want to be aware of that little hiccup. All right, on to things that have been deprecated in VuFind 11. We no longer support the PHP memcache extension in the memcache session handler. Or rather, we do support it, but we no longer encourage you to use it. Use memcached instead. These two different PHP extensions do essentially the same thing in different ways, and the older one is no longer strongly compatible with PHP 8.4, so we're dropping support for that, moving to the better supported version exclusively in future releases. If you have really old record tab configuration in your module config.php instead of using recordtabs.ini, you should switch that over. It will start putting deprecation warnings in your log, but it won't break yet. We are planning to drop support for CAS authentication because the PHP CAS library maintained by the CAS community has been abandoned with no replacement in sight. It seems that most CAS servers also support OpenID Connect, so we're encouraging people look into switching from CAS to OpenID Connect in your VuFind configuration. If that is not possible for you, then I'd encourage you to talk to the CAS community about resuming support of their PHP CAS library so we can continue to use it. In addition to those earlier deprecations, we've removed a lot of things that were deprecated in the past. So the auth view helper no longer has an is logged in method. Record drivers no longer have add tags and remove tags methods. The config locator class has been removed in favor of the VuFind config path resolver. Um, because that static class was able to be directly accessed and the new non-static class cannot, quite a few constructor signatures had to change. So if you have any code referencing VuFind config locator, you'll probably need to do a little work to modernize it. We got rid of the Figlets CAPTCHA because the Laminas text library that was used to generate it has been abandoned. We got rid of the CSP nonce view helper because it was redundant. We got rid of the CSP header generator get header method. Uh, we got rid of the phone number form handler JavaScript function because that was part of some very old code that has been modernized. We dropped the legacy Primo connector. There's a new RESTful Primo connector that you should use instead. Uh, the Alpha Browse jar files have been rebuilt with some deprecated functionality removed. You shouldn't even notice that difference. The base search options class has gotten rid of the supports first last navigation method in favor of the clearer record first last navigation enabled method. The EDS search backend base class retrieve method has been removed, replaced by some more specifically named ones. We've gotten rid of the Solar version 3 error listener because we don't use Solar version 3 and never will again. And the Solar version 4 error listener has been changed to just the Solar error listener because we no longer have error listeners tied to specific versions of Solar. We got rid of the add this view helper because that relied on a service that no longer exists. Similarly, we got rid of the cover and review plugins for BookSite because that service no longer exists. And we dropped support for Syndetics Plus content functionality because that service is no longer supported, though plain Syndetics is still supported and still works. We also got rid of the util SCSS builder command line tool. You shouldn't be using PHP to build your SCSS. Use the NPM version instead. And we got rid of unused get view methods from the EDS and EPF search options objects. The VuFind cart get cookie methods have been refactored into a separate cookie manager view helper, and some other cookie related cart logic in the JavaScript and templates has been removed, just to simplify the cart and make the cookies accessible without relying on the cart. The toggle drop-down translation string is no longer used anywhere and has been removed from the language files. It's been replaced with more accessible and descriptive language for which drop-downs are being toggled in all the places where it's used. If you have this translation string in local templates, you'll need to replace it or move it into your local language files. SolarMark, our mark indexing tool, no longer supports reading old VuFind 1 style configurations, which really should not affect you at this point. And all of the controllers containing result scroller active methods have been updated to not contain those methods because the search options classes control the availability of the result scroller functionality. The metadata updating step of the web-based upgrade process has been removed. There is now a command line tool called util update resource metadata that you can use to be sure that any resources stored in the database to support favorites lists and such are up to date and in sync with the search backends. And as I mentioned earlier, we added some new fields to the resource table. So you'll definitely want to run this tool as part of your upgrade and possibly on an ongoing basis to make sure all your data is up to date. We've gotten rid of the enable and enabled methods in the VuFind theme mobile class. They were only used in one place and they were confusing. And we've changed the VuFind theme initializer pick theme method to get selected UI. This relates to some earlier things I mentioned about improving the way VuFind determines what theme is active. The EDS record driver has had the get items abstract method removed. This was apparently not used for anything. But if you use it, you'll need to locally recreate it. And then also the options classes for EDS and EPF, two different EBSCO services, have had the get EDS view and get EPF view methods removed in favor of a shared abstract get EBSCO view method to make the logic less redundant. All right, that was a lot. And I thank you for bearing with me if you are still here. I just want to close out with a couple of resources that I always mention in these videos. I recorded a video a few years ago showing how I use Git to make the upgrade process less painful. If you have a lot of customizations and you haven't already watched that video, you might want to take a look. I also wrote a blog post 10 years ago now, but it's still relevant about how I use Git and some other tools to automatically update my local custom configurations and themes with upstream changes without having to manually diff everything. Again, if you have a lot of customizations, check this out. It might save you a lot of time and effort. And I'll just close out by saying, if you have any questions about this, or if you run into any problems with the upgrade, feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to get an email about VuFind at damien.katz@villanova.edu, or you can find me on the Open Library Foundation Slack if real-time chat is more to your liking. Thanks again for bearing with me through this long video. I hope it's helpful to you, and I hope you have a great experience upgrading VuFind. See you in the next one.